The night the soldiers lost their minds, Eira was the only one who thought to ask permission. A lunar eclipse had swallowed the sky whole. The courtyard of the capital fortress stretched before her in shades of copper and ash, and somewhere inside that writhing mass of fur and bone and fury, men she had treated for wounds and nightmares were trying to tear each other apart. Alpha King Aldric stood at the fortress steps. His voice cracked across the courtyard like a whip. "Stand down now." The command carried the full force of an alpha compulsion, the kind that stopped hearts and bent knees. It should have worked. It always worked. Instead, the wolves screamed. They didn't slow. They turned, every one of them, as though the command itself were a blade driven into their skulls. Two soldiers nearest the king's voice began attacking the wall. A third slammed his own head against the stone until a healer pulled him back. Eira stood frozen at the edge of the courtyard. She had no wolf. She could not shift, could not fight, could not call on Packlink or Alpha authority. She was an Omega, born without a wolf soul of her own, which meant she had spent her entire life being told there was nothing she could do. A shape separated from the churning mass. Enormous, a wolf built like a battering ram, fur the color of old iron. It saw her. It locked on her. It charged. Eira did not run. She did not shout or raise her hands or reach for the belt of healer's tools at her hip. She waited until the wolf was close enough for her to see the color of panic in its eyes. Golden brown. Wild, with something that had nothing to do with the animal itself. She recognized those eyes. Dovar, a sergeant, 6 sessions with her in the treatment wing. The man who had been the first to step through her door, the first to press his wrist to hers and say, "I trust you." And now the compulsion had him, and some part of him was still in there, fighting it from the inside. She said quietly, "Will you let me in?" The wolf stopped 3 feet from her, its chest heaved, its claws scored the stone. For 3 long seconds nothing happened, then the golden brown eyes dimmed, and behind them, something else looked out. Something human and exhausted and desperate. A memory rose without warning in Eira's mind. A child's laughter. High and clear, the kind that rang off kitchen walls on cold mornings. Dovar hadn't spoken it aloud. He had simply given it. Between one breath and the next, Eira saw the silver door. It stood in the middle of nothing, tall and quiet, its surface like still water. He had opened it himself. She hadn't summoned it. She hadn't forced it. She had simply asked, and he had chosen. She moved toward it. The eclipse swallowed the last of the light. She stepped through. 3 months earlier, Eira had not known she could do any of that. She had known only that she was good at noticing what others missed. The medical wing of the royal garrison was a busy place, full of healers who treated broken bones and arrow wounds and infections. Most of them did not linger. They stitched and splinted and moved on to the next bed. Eira lingered. She noticed the soldier who flinched when a door banged open 3 rooms away. She noticed the ones whose sleep was so broken they had stopped trying to sleep at all, who sat upright in their cots in the gray hours before dawn, staring at the far wall. She did not have a diagnosis for what she saw. She only knew that bone healed differently than whatever this was. The morning everything changed. A soldier was brought in on a stretcher. He was not wounded. His pulse was steady, his skin unbroken, but he was rigid, every muscle locked, his jaw clenched so tight she could hear his teeth grind. 2 orderlies held his arms because he had already struck 3 people without appearing to know he was doing it. Eira leaned over him. She put her hand on his forearm, the way she always did. Not to pin, but just to be present. Something hit her, not physically. It was more like walking into a sound she couldn't hear with her ears, a frequency beneath language. And under it, Woven through the soldier's pulse like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to him, came a sound that made the back of her teeth ache. A howl, black and wrong. On his chest, beneath the open collar of his tunic, a mark she had seen on dozens of soldiers, the standard loyalty brand given at induction, was glowing. Not the warm gold of a bonded pack link, an oily, bruised purple. Eira pulled her hand back. The sound faded. From the doorway of the medical wing, someone was watching. She didn't register the figure at first. When she looked up, he was already gone. But she remembered the silhouette for the rest of the day. And she would not understand what it meant until it was too late. The man had been Lord Malrec. 2 days after the incident in the medical wing, the court convened for the seasonal loyalty rites. Eira had no reason to be in the Great Hall that evening. She was a garrison healer's assistant, an Omega without a wolf, which meant she held no rank the court was required to acknowledge. She had been invited because one of the senior healers required a second attendant, and she was available. She stood near the back. She watched the king. Aldric was 29 years old, and he moved through the great hall the way a river moved through bedrock, without apology, wearing the certainty of someone who had never been told. He needed to earn what he already possessed. She had not expected the mate bond. It arrived the way she had always heard it described, a sudden heat behind the sternum, a recognition so immediate it bypassed thought entirely. For one moment she felt it mirror back from across the room, felt him feel it too, saw his eyes find her through the crowd with an expression she would spend months trying to name. Then Lord Malrec stepped close to the king and murmured something. Aldric's expression closed. What followed moved with a formal speed that left her no room to speak. The ritual concluded. The king spoke. His words fell on the great hall with perfect correctness. The match is not viable. The Omega is to be escorted from the capital by morning. Eira stood very still around her. The court rearranged itself. Some faces were carefully blank. Some were curious. One lord near the dais looked satisfied in a way that reminded her of the glowing mark she had seen 2 days ago. She said, because she had nothing left to lose, and the words were already formed. Are you refusing me because I have done something wrong, or because you are afraid of what it will look like if you choose me? The hall went very quiet. Aldric did not answer. He held her gaze for 4 seconds, then he looked away. He picked up the writ that had already been prepared, and he signed it himself. No one guided his hand, no one forced him. The quill moved, and the ink dried, and that was the end of it. Captain Rhea was assigned to escort her out of the capital by dawn. The road east was 3 days through forested hills. They traveled in a small group, Rhea and 2 junior guards, Eira with a single pack of possessions, and no official destination beyond the words Eastern Territories written on her expulsion papers. They were ambushed on the second morning, not by bandits, by a man who had once been a soldier. He came out of the tree line at a run, already shifted, and the speed of him was wrong. Not the clean burst of a wolf in control of itself, but something mechanical, driven. He was enormous. He moved in a straight line toward the smallest member of their group. A child traveling with a merchant cart that had joined them at the last waypost. Eira stepped in front of the child. She did not have time to think about whether it was wise. The wolf hit her, his shoulder clipped hers, and they both went down, and in the tumbling chaos of that contact she was pulled somewhere she had never been, inside. Not her own mind, his. She saw in fractured images, a long stone building with no windows and too many beds. Men with open eyes who responded to nothing, a figure in dark robes moving between them, and on each man's chest, a mark that pulsed in that same bruised purple, She saw a woman laughing in a garden, dark hair, flower on her hands. She saw a small girl sitting on a gatepost, swinging her legs. Then the girl calling out Papa in a voice like a child's laughter. The wolf was pinning her against the roots of a fallen tree. His jaws were open near her throat. His eyes showed white around the edges, but underneath the compulsion something was still in there. Something that had shown her the flower-covered woman without meaning to. Eira said clearly, "Bryn, that's your daughter's name." The wolf went rigid. She had not known the name. It had come with the image, but it landed like a key in a lock. The purple pulsing on his chest stuttered. For one moment she saw, in the space between them, the shimmer of a silver door, half-formed, fragile, like a reflection in disturbed water. He was trying to open it. He was reaching. "You can show me the rest," she said quietly. "I won't take anything you don't give me." The door solidified. She moved through it, and she helped him find the wall between his own thoughts and the command that had been threaded through them. She couldn't remove it, but she could help him recognize it, could help him build a marker, like a stone set at the edge of a field, so that when the command spoke, it no longer sounded like his own voice. When she came back to herself, the wolf had collapsed onto his side. He was shifting back. By the time he was fully human again, he was weeping without knowing it. His name was Torin. He told them, haltingly, about the building with no windows, about the marks they had given him, about the orders that arrived in his sleep like a voice he could not unhear. He had run when the orders told him to find his wife. He had known, even through the compulsion, that he was not safe near her. He had gone rogue rather than go home. Rhea did not send him back to the garrison. She looked at Eira for a long moment, then looked at Torin, and made a decision that would cost her everything she had built in 20 years of service. "There's an elder healer in the border territories," she said. "Her name is Mara. If anyone knows what this is, it's her." Elder Mara was 73 years old and lived at the edge of a border pack's territory. Malrec had revoked her healer's license 4 years ago. The official charge was misconduct. The real reason, she explained over a fire on their first night, was that she had refused to stay silent about what she had done. "I formalized soulwalking as a treatment method 15 years ago," she said, entering a wolfsoul's inner landscape with their consent to help them rebuild. "It worked. Then Malrec asked me to try it without consent on a soldier who had refused an order." Her voice was dry. "I did it. The soldier lost 14 years of memory." She looked at Eira. "You're doing something similar with no training. That's more dangerous than having no ability at all." She paused. "I spent years believing the program had ended. I discovered 4 years ago that Malrec had continued it without me." She taught Eira the shape of what Eira already had, 3 principles. Consent had to be genuine, not performed. The silver door appeared only when a wolf soul chose to open it. A spoken yes under pressure was not enough. On their first training day, a veteran from the border pack agreed to a session, but was clearly terrified of appearing weak. Eira reached for him and found nothing. The door didn't appear. "He said yes," Eira said. "His wolf said no," Mara replied. "They both live in there." The second principle was the anchor, a memory entirely Eira's own, held in the center of herself when she walked into someone else's landscape. She chose the feeling of cold water on her hands, the most ordinary thing she knew. The third principle was simple. When the door began to close, she left, without negotiation, without one more attempt. Torin came to her on the 4th day and offered to open the door again. He wanted the compulsion quieter, not gone. Mara had already told them it was too embedded to remove, only to push back. The door appeared the moment he offered the memory of his daughter's hand in his. Eira went in and helped him build something alongside the obsidian thread. A marker he could touch when the foreign voice tried to sound like him. When she stepped back, he slept 12 hours without waking. He told them in the morning it was the first time since the experiments began. Rhea started showing symptoms on the 7th day: nightmares, memory gaps, a flash of violence toward a junior guard she couldn't explain. She came to Eira that evening and said she wanted to know what was in her. Under one condition, she said, Mara monitors. If I say stop, you stop. Both of those, Eira said. They sat together in Mara's healing room. Rhea's anchor memory was a line of new recruits standing in rain, too young, too frightened, looking at her the way the lost looked at anything that seemed sure of itself. The silver door appeared. Eira went in. The obsidian thread in Rhea was newer than Torin's and brighter. It ran toward a central node somewhere distant, like a nerve tracking back to a spine. Eira thought, if I can trace this to the source, I'll understand the whole network. She moved toward the thread. Eira. Rhea's voice, very calm. That's far enough. Close the connection. Behind Eira, the silver door began to narrow. She heard Rhea. She understood. She took one step back. And then she thought, 3 more seconds, and I'll know where the hub is. Rhea will understand when it's done. She held the connection open. The obsidian thread pulsed like a live wire. The surge hit Rhea, and her wolf shifted in an explosion of panic, and her elbow struck Lysa squarely across the wrist. The crack of bone was very loud in the small room. When Rhea shifted back, she said, I gave you permission to enter. I did not give you permission to stay after I asked you to leave. Eira did not argue. There was nothing to argue. Lysa's wrist was fractured in 2 places. She sat on the floor holding it against her chest, very pale. Mara said afterward that she would know in 6 months whether she had recovered the fine precision needed for surgical work. In the morning, Eira called a meeting. Mara, Rhea, Torin, Lysa, and said what needed to be said. I heard Rhea tell me to stop. I stayed because I decided my goal mattered more than the limit she had set. The injury to Lysa belongs to me. She paused. I won't soulwalk again without 2 witnesses present and a clear withdrawal signal. Lysa keeps the record of every session. She can call a stop whether or not the patient or I agree. Lysa looked at her. Then she said flatly, I'll do it, not for you. So it doesn't happen to someone else. That was the agreement, not forgiveness, not restored trust, something more careful and more honest than either. The news from the capital arrived in fragments. A dispatch rider brought civilian letters and nothing official, which was itself a kind of message. A trader mentioned the garrison was under medical lockdown. Another mentioned 3 senior officers removed for erratic behavior. Mara read the pattern. He's activating the network, testing it, seeing who breaks and holds. Then a single burned page from a military report arrived, folded inside a letter addressed to Torin. It described an upcoming loyalty ceremony, a ritual for the full garrison, framed as a morale rite. Scheduled for the next full eclipse. At the bottom, in small writing, someone had added, It is not a ceremony. Do not let them attend it. Rhea was formally stripped of her captaincy that same week. She had disobeyed the direct order to return Torin to royal custody, concealed a protected witness, and remained beyond the capital without authorization. Aldric signed the order. He did not investigate first. She received the news without expression and said to Eira that evening, Whatever we do, it has to protect the soldiers, not the king, the people who are going to end up as instruments if we don't stop this. 3 days later, Aldric arrived at the border with a small escort and no ceremony. He said, when Eira came out to meet him, You need to return to the capital. You're still leading with a command, she said. That's exactly why you don't understand what's happening to your soldiers. He was quiet for a moment. She laid out 4 conditions. Torin recognized as a protected witness. Rhea reinstated. Mara's license restored. The charges against Eira formally withdrawn. No soldier compelled into treatment. All 4 in writing, witnessed by everyone present. He signed. The treatment wing Eira established was in a converted storage building. Low ceilings, good natural light, a door that could not be locked from outside. The protocol was posted on the wall in plain language. Nobody came for the first 2 days. Then Rhea walked in. Not to be healed again, she said, but to check whether Eira would actually stop if told to stop. Midway through a limited session, Rhea said, "That's enough." Eira withdrew immediately. Rhea was quiet for a long time. Then she opened the silver door herself and led Eira toward the mark, not to destroy it, but to map it. To find the line between where Rhea ended and the obsidian voice began. When they finished, Rhea stepped outside and told the soldiers waiting at a distance, "Eira doesn't heal you. She helps you find where you stop and someone else's command starts. What you do with that is your own business." The next morning, 11 soldiers requested sessions. Dovar was the first to step through the door. Torin met separately with those who wanted to understand what had been done to them. Not through soulwalking, but in conversation, in the practical terms of a man who had lived inside what they were living inside. He was not a healer, he was a witness. Lisa recorded everything. Her wrist still ached on cold mornings. She had not told Eira whether that was going to be permanent. The tunnel beneath the throne room had not been used in at least 30 years. Eira found the resonance by accident, a frequency that made the obsidian threads in the recovering soldiers flicker whenever they passed through the east corridor of the garrison's lower level. She traced it over 2 days, moving through the building with Torin and Aldric, following the subtle wrongness in the air the way she had once followed that bruised pulse beneath a soldier's skin. The access point was behind a storage alcove. The tunnel itself was older than the current fortress, cut from the same dark stone as the original walls, lit by phosphorescent moss along the lower edges. A collapsed footbridge forced them to stop. The gap was about 4 feet across. Aldric moved to cross first and stopped himself. He looked at Eira. "Can I help you across?" She nodded. He offered his hand, and she took it, and they crossed. She noticed that he had stopped himself. She noticed that he had asked. She did not say anything about it. Deeper in, Eira began hearing the obsidian frequency more strongly and pointed them toward a narrower side passage rather than the wider, well-worn route. Aldric said, "The garrison records show the main passage goes. The sound is worse in the main passage," Eira said. He changed direction without further argument. In the quiet stretch that followed, Aldric said, "The question you asked me in the Great Hall. I've thought about it, more than I've thought about almost anything else this year." Eira considered the darkness ahead of them. "That doesn't answer it." "No," he said, "it doesn't. I was afraid of what it would cost me, and I chose the cost I preferred." "That's the honest version," she said. "Regret isn't change. It's just where change can start." He received that without asking her to soften it. After a moment, he asked, "The covenant you described to me on the border, what does the first session look like? Not the governance structure. What actually happens in the room?" Eira glanced at him. He was not asking about the mate bond. He was not asking whether there was still a place for him. He was asking about the work, she told him. They walked the rest of the tunnel in a different kind of quiet. The chamber at the tunnel's end held shelving along 3 walls and a locked cabinet near the back. Torin broke the lock. Inside were documents in Malrec's handwriting, and an older script that matched the royal archives, a detailed history of a project that had begun as a therapeutic protocol and been transformed, step by step, into something else entirely. Aldric's father had signed the original authorization. The early stages had genuinely been what Malrec claimed: an attempt to help soldiers who had returned from the wars unable to control their wolves. Then the documentation shifted. Experimental subjects became subjects rather than patients. Consent forms disappeared from the records. The Obsidian modification to the loyalty brand appeared in a section labeled Protocol Enhancement. The soldiers who had objected, who had tried to warn others or file reports, were listed under Rogue Threat Assessment. And at the bottom of a separate folder, Eira found her own name, not in the current documents. In a report dated 18 months ago, describing a medical wing incident in which a Wolfless Omega assistant had made unexpected contact with an experimentally marked soldier and appeared to trigger a response in the Obsidian thread. Malrec had known about her before the mate bond. He had known what she might be able to do. The rejection had not been Aldric's idea, refined by bad advice. Malrec had been positioning her for removal since before she had any reason to know she mattered. Aldric read the same folder. He set it down. He said, "I want to delay releasing this. I need time to prepare the council, to ensure there's no panic." "You told me silence keeps systems running," Eira said. "You know that's true because it kept this one running." He was quiet. "You signed a document to have me removed," she said. "Not because you were forced. Because you decided the cost of not signing was too high. The only version of this that's different from that is one where you don't decide the cost again before you tell the truth." He released the documents that evening. Malrec was in the garrison commander's office when the guards came for him. He walked out with them calmly. But in the corridor outside the treatment wing, he turned to Eira with the expression of a man who had been waiting for a specific conversation. He said, "Every soldier you've worked with asked you to help them forget the worst of it. You've seen what's in there. You know exactly which memories are destroying them and which ones they could live without. I'm offering you the ability to choose. Cleanly, permanently, they stop suffering. You stop watching them suffer. The war ends tonight." She had spent months watching men shake themselves awake from nightmares. She had felt in soul-walking sessions the sheer weight of what they were carrying. Things they had seen and done that had no resolution, no redemption, no way to be made acceptable within the normal architecture of a life. She understood the offer. She understood why it was compelling. She said, "Even relief from pain doesn't belong to me to give if the person in pain hasn't chosen it." He looked at her steadily. "You've already decided for patience. You've already shaped what you leave behind when you walk out of a session. The difference between you and me is honesty about what we're doing." She felt the truth in it. She felt how close it was to accurate. She also felt how it worked, how it used the true part to smuggle in the rest. She said, "You're right that I've made those choices. That's why we have a protocol. That's why Liza records every session. That's why I stop when I'm told to stop." She stepped back. No. Before the guards reached the main gate, Malrec pressed a blood seal hidden beneath his signet ring. It did not activate the howl immediately. It armed the network to activate when the eclipse reached totality 40 minutes away. The eclipse began, and the garrison became a war zone without anyone throwing a single weapon. The obsidian threads activated all at once. Every soldier in the fortress who had been marked simultaneously received the same command, and the command overrode everything above it. including their own judgment and 4 months of careful reconstruction work. Those who had been treated most recently held longer. Those who hadn't been treated at all shifted immediately, slamming against the discipline they had held their entire careers with the force of something that had been waiting patiently for this moment. Aldric raised his voice across the courtyard. The Alpha command came out of him like a reflex, deep and authoritative, and trained into him from childhood. It made it worse. Every soldier who heard it felt the obsidian thread interpret the command as an activation trigger, and they screamed. Aldric stopped speaking mid-word. He looked at his hands as though they had just done something he didn't recognize. Rhea was beside him. She said, "Give me the coordinates. I'll direct the physical response. You need to stop using your voice." He nodded. He stepped back and let her work. Across the courtyard, Dovar was fighting the compulsion the way a man fights a current he cannot outswim. Everything in him straining against the command to close the distance between himself and Eira. He was losing, he charged. And this time Eira was ready. She did not run. She waited until the old iron fur was close enough for her to see those golden brown eyes again, still human underneath the panic, still reaching. She said, "Will you let me in?" He stopped, 3 feet from her, the same 3 feet as before. The same child's laughter rose between them like an offered hand. The silver door appeared, and this time Eira knew what it meant. She went through. She sent one thing through the network as she touched each connecting thread. Not a command, not a compulsion, a question, before anyone else told you what to be loyal to. What did you choose to protect? Some doors stayed closed. She passed by them. In the first 3 minutes, 4 soldiers separated from the mass. They were not healed. They were not freed. They had simply found for a moment a memory that was more theirs than the voice in their heads, and it gave them enough purchase to stop moving forward. Then she was pulled deeper, following the thread back toward its source, and the source was enormous. It hit her like a wave, and inside the wave were hundreds of soldiers, and all of their worst nights. The things they'd done under orders they hadn't been able to refuse. The weight of every command they had carried without question, the long years of being instruments in someone else's design. She felt, at the center of it, the offer again, not from Malrec directly, from the network itself, which was simply the sum of all that power running in one direction. She could redirect it. She could feel exactly where the controls were and exactly how they worked. She could issue a single command that would end the fighting in 60 seconds. She could do it for good reasons. That was the part that made her stop. Not the power, the reasons. She thought of Rhea's door beginning to close. She thought of the 3 extra breaths she had taken. She thought of Liza's wrist and the crack of bone, and the way being certain she was helping had not changed what she had done. She let the center of the network go. She asked her question again, this time into every wolfsoul she could reach. Before anyone else told you what loyalty meant, what did you choose? The answers came back in images. Not words, a field, a brother. A river the soldiers had swum in as children, a woman waiting with a lamp in a window, a promise made before either party was old enough to know how promises worked, a dog. A pair of worn-down boots left outside a door. The first soldier to break free of the compulsion entirely was Rhea. She was fighting in wolf form at the edge of the courtyard. She stopped. She stood completely still for 5 seconds, which in the middle of a melee was an act of extraordinary will. Then she shifted back, stood up in the chaos, and set her sword on the ground in front of her. She turned her back on Malrec's position. Others followed, not all at once, not all of them. But one by one, across the courtyard, Wolves went still, and soldiers straightened and set down their weapons and stood facing away from the Obsidian signal. They were not choosing Eira. They were choosing to stop being weapons. The network began to fail from the edges inward. The Obsidian threads couldn't maintain their grip when the wolfsouls they were running through actively declined to carry the current. Malrec's control required compliance the way fire required fuel. Remove the fuel and the burning became its own end. Aldric had worked his way to the source chamber below the throne room. He reached the control point as the network was already fracturing. He broke the final seal, a carved obsidian rod set in a mounting beneath the floor of the throne room, and the network collapsed entirely. It took 6 more minutes for the last of the compelled soldiers to find their footing. Those who had kept their gates closed were restrained and held for treatment under the new protocol. No one forced an opening. They would be offered a session when they were ready to choose it themselves. The silence afterward was very strange. Malrec had retreated to the far courtyard wall. He was surrounded by soldiers who had been under his control 20 minutes ago, and none of them were following his instructions anymore. He was apprehended without significant resistance. He seemed, above all else, to find the situation incorrect. Eira became aware she was sitting on the cobblestones and had been for some time. Lisa was crouched beside her. "Are you in there?" Lisa said. At some point during the dissolution, reaching through hundreds of wolf souls, Eira's own name had begun to feel like a fact about someone else. Aldric had reached her while she was somewhere else entirely. He had not used the mate bond. He had simply listed things in a flat voice. Torin opened the door himself. "Rhea told you to stop, and you learned to listen. You wrote the rules so the mistake wouldn't repeat. Your name is what you put in the center." Rhea had told him what Eira used as an anchor. He had found a version of it to give back. She came back to herself. She put both hands flat on the cold cobblestones and stayed until she was sure she knew where she ended. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks. Torin testified without being compelled, without his memories being extracted or displayed. He sat before the council and spoke in his own words about what had been done to him, including the parts that were not easy to describe, and the parts where he had done things under compulsion that he still could not make peace with. The council heard him. Several of them were visibly uncomfortable. 2 requested breaks. Mara testified about her own role, the original research, the session she had conducted without consent, the years she had spent in the border territories, instead of returning to face what she had participated in. She did not reduce her involvement, and she did not use the word mistake in a way that minimized what the soldier had lost. Aldric presented the full documentation about his father's authorization of the project. He stood before the council and listed, without editorial, every decision he had personally made in the preceding 2 years that had contributed to the system's operation and concealment, the rejection and expulsion, the loyalty ceremony he had approved, the captaincy revocation he had signed before reviewing the evidence. He did not say that Malrec had manipulated him as though it were an excuse. He said that he had allowed himself to be manipulated because it had been easier than asking questions he was afraid to hear the answers to. The council deliberated. There were genuine disagreements, not theater. Alpha Sarek from the Northern Territories argued consistently for rigorous investigation and the strongest protections for affected soldiers. Lady Neris raised procedural concerns about Soulwalking's future use that required real answers, not dismissal. Councillor Hadron attempted twice to redirect proceedings toward assessing Eira as a security risk, and both times Aldric declined to allow it. Malrec was convicted on 4 counts: unauthorized experimentation on crown soldiers, systematic suppression of autonomous judgment without consent or legal authority, deliberate falsification of military records to conceal resistance, and the full activation of the network with intent to use the garrison as a weapon against civilians. He was sentenced to permanent magical confinement in a sealed detention territory under multi-pack guard, no obsidian access, no contact with active soldiers, no blood seal capability of any kind. The sentence was not exile, it was not freedom under another name. The day after sentencing, Aldric signed 4 pieces of legislation. The first prohibited mandatory modification to loyalty bonds. The second established consent requirements for any spiritual intervention on pack members. The third extended full civic status to Omegas and those unable to shift. The fourth created a formal review process for soldiers classified as rogues while resisting the Obsidian Howl. Tauren was in the chamber when that last one was signed. Under a separate protection order signed the same day, he was authorized to contact his wife and daughter under supervised arrangement. He did not say anything when the document was handed to him. He folded it once and put it inside his jacket, close to where the marker Eira had helped him build, still held against the obsidian voice. The wolfsoul covenant was proposed by Mara and formalized by the full group: Eira, Rhea, Tauren, Lysa, pack representatives, affected soldiers, an Omega advocate who had worked border territory cases for 15 years. It operated independently of the throne, with its own oversight structure, and a board Eira could be removed from if she violated its protocols. She accepted the founding chair and signed the limitation documents at the same time. Lysa joined the oversight board. She had said, shortly before proceedings began, that she intended to be the most rigorous person on it, and that Eira should not expect her to find that role comfortable. Eira had said that was exactly why she wanted Lysa on it. The first formal session of the Wolfsoul Covenant was held 6 weeks after the sentencing. It was in a converted hall near the garrison's medical wing, neutral ground, accessible, with windows that opened on both sides so that no one would feel enclosed. 12 people were expected. 17 arrived. Aldric came to the door. He stopped outside it. The hall was not a throne room, and he had no summons here. The territory of the Covenant was not the territory of the Crown, which was a distinction the founding documents had been very deliberate about. He seemed to understand this because he did not push the door open. He waited. Eira saw him through the window. She came out and handed him a copy of the morning's agenda. "Come in with me," she said. "But this time, listen before you speak." He took the agenda. He looked at it. "How long have you had a rule about that?" "I've been working on it," she said. She slowed her pace at the threshold without making a particular event of it, and he fell into step beside her. Inside, the Covenant was already in session, not waiting for them, not silenced by their arrival. Rhea was in the middle of a point about field protocol. Tauren was drawing something on the board that looked like a map of the garrison's lower level. Mara was asking Lysa a question about record format. 3 soldiers Eira had treated and never expected to see in a room like this were sitting in the corner, following the conversation with an attention that was new on their faces, or perhaps just newly visible. No one stood, no one announced a change in the room. The conversation simply continued, and they joined it. Outside, the season was turning toward winter, the kind of clear cold that made everything in the distance look closer than it was. Inside, the room was warm and the voices overlapped, and the morning agenda was already behind schedule in the way that meant people had questions they actually wanted answered. Eira had spent 2 years wanting a room to look at her and confirm she belonged in it. The room was looking at something else entirely. It was looking at the work. She sat down, opened her copy of the agenda, and looked at the work too. No one had issued a command for silence. The voices in the room had simply, of their own accord, begun to make space for something worth hearing.